The fluorescent lights in the hospital break room buzzed with their usual irritating hum as Sarah Chan stared at the collection notice in her hands. $60,000 in student loans, another $15,000 on her father's medical bills, and now her landlord was threatening eviction if she didn't come up with 3 months of back rent by the end of the week. She was a registered nurse, someone who was supposed to be helping people, yet she couldn't even help herself. Her best friend Maya sat down beside her with 2 cups of terrible vending machine coffee. Maya took one look at Sarah's face and sighed. She had seen that expression too many times lately, the look of someone who was drowning and couldn't find the surface. "You need to hear me out this time," Maya said quietly. "I know you said no before, but things are getting worse. My cousin works for an agency that connects surrogates with families who need them. The pay is really good, Sarah, really good." Sarah shook her head automatically. "I can't carry someone else's baby for money. That's not who I am." Maya grabbed her hand across the table. "Listen to me. You're not some mercenary. You'd be giving someone the greatest gift imaginable, and the compensation would solve all your problems. My cousin told me about a client who's been searching for the right surrogate for over a year. He's offering $300,000. The number hit Sarah like a physical force. $300,000! She could pay off everything, help her father with his ongoing treatments, maybe even have something left over to finally breathe. But the idea of carrying a child for 9 months and then handing it over felt impossible. "I don't know," Sarah whispered. "Just meet with the agency. One meeting. If you hate the idea, you never have to think about it again." That meeting happened 3 days later in a sleek office in downtown Manhattan that made Sarah feel completely out of place in her worn sneakers and clearance rack blazer. The agency director, a woman named Patricia with perfectly styled silver hair, smiled warmly and explained the process with practiced ease. "Our client is a very successful businessman who's been wanting a family for quite some time. He's 42 years old, exceptionally healthy, and has very specific requirements for his surrogate. He wants someone intelligent, healthy, with a good family medical history, and someone who understands the importance of following medical guidelines precisely." "Why doesn't he just get married and have kids the normal way?" Sarah asked. Patricia's smile never wavered. "He's focused on his career and hasn't found the right partner, but he doesn't want to wait any longer to become a father. He's very committed to this child already, and he will be an active, involved parent." Sarah listened as Patricia outlined the terms. $300,000, paid in installments, full medical coverage, a generous monthly stipend for expenses, legal contracts protecting both parties. It sounded almost too good to be true, which usually meant it was. "I need to think about it," Sarah said. "Of course, but I should mention that he'd like to meet you. He's reviewed your file and thinks you might be exactly what he's looking for. Would you be willing to have dinner with him? Just to talk, no commitment." Sarah agreed before she could talk herself out of it. 2 days later, she found herself in an exclusive restaurant where the prices on the menu didn't even have numbers. She'd borrowed a dress from Maya and felt like an imposter as the hostess led her to a private table in the back. Alexander Hartman stood as she approached. He was tall, probably 6'2", with dark hair that was graying slightly at the temples and sharp blue eyes that seemed to assess everything in an instant. He wore a perfectly tailored suit that probably cost more than Sarah made in 3 months. When he shook her hand, his grip was firm but not aggressive. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice deep and measured. "I know this is unusual. Please, sit." They made awkward small talk for the first few minutes. Alexander asked about her work, and Sarah found herself relaxing slightly as she talked about the hospital, about the patients she cared for, about why she'd become a nurse. He listened intently, asking thoughtful questions that suggested he was genuinely interested rather than just polite. "Patricia said you've been looking for a surrogate for a while," Sarah finally said. "Why me?" Alexander set down his wine glass and looked at her directly. I've met with 17 potential surrogates in the past 14 months. All of them were qualified on paper. But when I talked to them, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just a transaction to them. A way to make money, which is fine, but not what I wanted for my child. "And what do you want?" Sarah asked. He leaned back in his chair. "I want someone who will take care of my child."
Baby, like it matters. Someone who understands the responsibility and the gift. When I read your file, I saw that you've been taking care of your father through cancer treatments. You work double shifts to pay for his care. That tells me you understand love and sacrifice. Sarah felt her throat tighten. My father's bills are why I'm even considering this. I know. Patricia was very transparent about your financial situation. I appreciate honesty. So let me be honest with you. I'm offering you this opportunity because I believe you'll do right by my child. But I also need to know that you understand what this means. For 9 months, you'll be carrying my son or daughter. I'll want to be involved. Doctor's appointments, decisions about prenatal care, preparing for the birth. This isn't a situation where I hand you money and disappear until delivery day. Sarah studied him carefully. There was no warmth in Alexander Hartman's expression, but there was sincerity. He wasn't trying to charm her or manipulate her. He was laying out terms like a business negotiation, which, in a way, it was. "If I agree, I have conditions too," Sarah said, surprising herself with her boldness. "I need everything in writing. I need to know that my medical care will be the best possible. And I need to know that once I hand over your baby, that's it. I don't want contact afterward. It would be too hard." Something flickered in Alexander's eyes, maybe disappointment, but he nodded. "That's fair. I'll have my lawyers draw up a contract that protects both of us." They talked for another hour, discussing practical details, timelines, and medical procedures. By the time Sarah left the restaurant, she felt like she just negotiated the most important deal of her life. She called Maya from the sidewalk outside. "I think I'm going to do it," she said quietly. The next few weeks moved quickly. Sarah signed contracts so thick she needed 3 days to read through them all. She underwent extensive medical and psychological evaluations. The psychologist asked her repeatedly if she understood the emotional implications of surrogacy, if she'd considered how difficult it might be to give up the baby after birth. Sarah assured her she understood completely, though deep down she wondered if anyone could really understand until they lived through it. The agency coordinated with a fertility clinic, and Alexander's lawyers ensured everything was documented and legal. Sarah kept working at the hospital, but now she had something that felt bizarrely like hope. The first installment of her payment had arrived, and she'd immediately paid 3 months of back rent and made a significant dent in her father's medical bills. The relief was almost physical. Her coworkers noticed the change in her demeanor. "Sarah, you seem different lately," one of the other nurses commented during a shift. "Something good happened?" "Just got some financial things sorted out," Sarah said vaguely. She hadn't told anyone at work about the surrogacy arrangement. It felt too personal, too complicated to explain. The embryo transfer happened on a Tuesday morning in April. Sarah lay on the examination table while the reproductive endocrinologist carefully implanted the embryo. The procedure itself was quick and painless, though emotionally, it felt monumental. Alexander wasn't in the room for the procedure. That felt too intimate, but he was waiting in the consultation room when she came out. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Weird," Sarah admitted. "It's strange knowing something might be happening inside me right now." Alexander almost smiled. "We won't know for sure for another 2 weeks." Those 2 weeks were torture. Sarah tried to go about her normal life, but everything felt suspended, uncertain. She found herself Googling early pregnancy symptoms obsessively, analyzing every small change in her body. She felt nauseous one morning and spent an hour convinced it was morning sickness before realizing she'd just had too much coffee on an empty stomach. Every twinge, every odd sensation became potentially significant. Maya called her daily to check in. "You're driving yourself crazy," she said, after Sarah spent 20 minutes describing a weird metallic taste in her mouth. "Just wait for the test. There's nothing you can do now except wait." But waiting was agony. Sarah had never been good at patience, and this felt like the most important wait of her life. Not because she wanted the baby for herself, she reminded herself firmly,
But because she'd made a commitment, Alexander was counting on her. She didn't want to let him down. When she finally went back to the clinic for the blood test, her hands were shaking as the phlebotomist drew her blood. The nurse told her they'd call with results later that afternoon. Sarah went home and tried to distract herself with cleaning her apartment, but she kept checking her phone every few minutes. The nurse called her at 3:15. "Congratulations," she said. "You're pregnant. Your HCG levels look great. We'll want to see you back in a week for another blood draw to make sure the numbers are rising appropriately." Sarah sat down hard on her couch, phone pressed to her ear. The nurse was saying something about scheduling the first ultrasound, about starting prenatal vitamins, about avoiding certain foods and activities. Sarah tried to focus, but her mind was reeling. She was pregnant. She was carrying Alexander Hartman's baby. She called him immediately. He answered on the second ring, and she could hear the tension in his voice. "It worked," she said simply. There was a long pause. "Thank you," he said, and for the first time, his voice carried real emotion. "Thank you, Sarah. I don't even know what to say. Thank you." "You don't have to thank me. We have a contract." "Still, thank you." They talked for a few more minutes about next steps and appointments, but Sarah could hear the barely contained excitement in Alexander's voice. This was real for him now, not just a possibility, but an actual child on the way. She wondered what that felt like, to want something so badly and finally have it within reach. The first trimester was miserable. Sarah had morning sickness that lasted all day, exhaustion so profound she could barely stay awake through her shifts, and a constant low-level anxiety about everything that could go wrong. She read pregnancy books obsessively, terrified she'd do something wrong that would harm the baby. She gave up coffee, avoided lunch meat and soft cheeses, took her prenatal vitamins religiously. Alexander checked in daily with text messages, asking how she felt, if she needed anything, whether she'd eaten enough protein. At first, his constant attention annoyed her. She wasn't a child who needed monitoring. But gradually, she realized he wasn't being controlling. He was worried. This baby, this child who didn't even exist yet in any meaningful way, already mattered to him more than anything else in his world. At 6 weeks, Sarah had her first bout of serious morning sickness at work. She barely made it to the bathroom before throwing up. When she emerged, pale and shaky, Maya was waiting with a concerned expression. "You okay? Do you need to go home?" "I'm fine, just something I ate." Maya gave her a knowing look. "Sarah, I know what morning sickness looks like. How far along are you?" 6 weeks, Sarah admitted quietly. Maya pulled her into a hug. "How are you feeling about it? Really?" "Honestly, terrified. And nauseous. Mostly nauseous." The first ultrasound happened at 8 weeks. Sarah lay on the examination table while the technician spread cold gel across her still flat stomach. Alexander sat in a chair beside her, leaning forward intently as the technician moved the wand around. The room was quiet except for the sound of the ultrasound machine. "There," the technician said, pointing at the screen. "That's your baby." Sarah stared at the tiny, flickering form on the screen. It didn't look like much, just a small gray blob with a rapid heartbeat. But something shifted inside her as she watched it. This was real. This was a life beginning. She glanced at Alexander and saw that he was staring at the screen with an expression she'd never seen on his face before. Wonder. Pure, unguarded wonder. His eyes were actually shining with unshed tears. "That's my child," he said softly. "Yes," Sarah said, "that's your child." "The heartbeat is strong and healthy," the technician said cheerfully. "Everything looks perfect. Would you like some printouts?" "Please," Alexander said immediately. They left the clinic with a folder full of ultrasound photos. Alexander held them like they were precious artifacts, which Sarah supposed, to him, they were. He looked at her in the parking lot. "Can I take you to lunch? To celebrate?" "Sure," Sarah said. They went to a quiet cafe near the clinic. Alexander kept pulling out the ultrasound photos to look at them, and Sarah found herself smiling despite her ongoing nausea. His joy was infectious. "I can't believe this is real," Alexander said. "I've been working toward this for so long, and now it's actually happening." "Tell me about that," Sarah said. "Why was this so important to you?" Alexander was quiet for a moment, stirring his coffee absently. "My parents died when I was 8, he said finally. "Car accident. I went to live with my grandmother. She was amazing, raised me on her own, worked multiple jobs to give me opportunities. But I always felt that absence, that missing piece. I grew up and I focused on building my company, on being successful. I told myself that was enough." "But it wasn't," Sarah guessed. "No. I'd go to business dinners and everyone would talk about their kids, show pictures, tell stories. And I'd sit there alone and realize that all the money in the world couldn't fill that particular emptiness. I dated, but I never met anyone who made me want to change my life. And time kept passing."
Suddenly I was 40, and then 42, and I realized if I kept waiting for the perfect situation, I'd wait forever. "So you decided to have a baby on your own?" "Yes, I know some people think it's selfish, but I have the resources to give a child an amazing life, and I want to. I want to be the kind of father my dad was before he died, the kind of parent my grandmother was to me. I want to matter to someone in that specific way." Sarah felt her perspective shifting. She'd thought of Alexander as just a wealthy man buying his way to fatherhood, but it was more complicated than that. He was lonely. He wanted connection. He wanted family. "You're going to be a good dad," she said. "I hope so. I'm terrified I'll mess it up." "Join the club," Sarah said with a slight smile. As the weeks progressed, Sarah's body changed in ways she hadn't anticipated. Her clothes stopped fitting, her breasts became tender and swollen, her emotions became unpredictable. She cried at commercials and snapped at coworkers for minor annoyances. One day she burst into tears in the grocery store because they were out of the specific brand of crackers she wanted. The pregnancy was taking over her life, and sometimes she resented it fiercely. She resented feeling sick all the time. She resented not being able to do her job properly because she was so tired. She resented the way her body was changing, becoming something unfamiliar. But Alexander was always there. He came to every doctor's appointment without fail, even when it meant rearranging important meetings. He took notes on everything the obstetrician said and asked detailed questions about fetal development. He sent healthy meals to Sarah's apartment when he knew she'd worked a long shift, always with a note saying something like, "Make sure you eat the salmon. The baby needs omega-3s." One particularly bad day, Sarah came home from a difficult shift to find Alexander waiting outside her apartment with a specialized pregnancy pillow and a bag of ginger tea. "You don't have to do all this," Sarah told him as they went inside. "I know you're busy." Alexander looked at her seriously. "There is nothing more important than this, than you taking care of my baby." "Your baby," Sarah corrected automatically, "not mine." Something passed across his face, but he just nodded. At 12 weeks, Sarah had genetic testing done. The waiting period for results was another round of torture. She found herself praying to a God she wasn't sure she believed in, that everything would be okay, that this baby Alexander wanted so desperately would be healthy. When the results came back normal, Sarah cried with relief. She called Alexander immediately to tell him the good news. She could hear the emotion in his voice when he thanked her. At 16 weeks, Sarah's father had a good day for the first time in weeks. She visited him at the hospice center where he was now living full-time. He was awake and alert, actually smiling when she came in. "There's my girl," he said, his voice weak but warm. "Hey, Dad," Sarah said, settling into the chair beside his bed. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a truck, but better than yesterday." "Tell me what's going on with you. You look different." Sarah hesitated. She hadn't told her father about the surrogacy arrangement. It seemed too complicated to explain, and she didn't want to worry him. But something in his knowing gaze made her realize he already suspected something. "I'm pregnant," she said quietly. "But it's not what you think. I'm a surrogate for someone. The money is helping pay for your care." Her father was quiet for a long moment. "Sarah, you didn't have to do that for me." "Yes, I did. You're my dad. You've always been there for me."
Tell me about this person, the father. So Sarah told him about Alexander, about their arrangement, about how he was actually kind and decent despite being a billionaire. Her father listened carefully. He sounds like a good man, he said finally. But Sarah, be careful. Carrying a baby for 9 months, that's not something you can just walk away from. Your heart might have other ideas. I know what I'm doing, Sarah insisted. Her father just smiled sadly. I hope so, sweetheart. I hope so. At 20 weeks, they went for the anatomy scan. This was the big one, where they check all the baby's organs and development, and where they could find out the sex if they wanted. Sarah lay on the examination table while the ultrasound technician moved the wand across her now obviously pregnant belly. The baby was much bigger now, actually looking like a baby instead of a blob. Everything looks perfect, the technician said cheerfully. Beautiful development. Do you want to know the sex? Alexander looked at Sarah. It's your choice. He's your baby. You decide. I'd like to know, Alexander said. The technician smiled. Congratulations, you're having a girl. A girl. Sarah watched Alexander's face transform. The cool, controlled businessman disappeared, replaced by a man who looked like he'd just been given the entire world. A daughter. He was going to have a daughter. She could see him already imagining it, planning for it, falling in love with someone who wouldn't be born for another 20 weeks. A girl, he repeated softly. I'm having a daughter. The technician printed out photos, including one that clearly showed the baby's face in profile. Alexander stared at it like it was a masterpiece. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She lay in bed with her hands on her growing belly, feeling the tiny flutters that would soon become real kicks. A girl. She tried to remind herself that this wasn't her baby, that she was just the carrier, but the lines were starting to blur in ways that frightened her. Her phone buzzed with a text from Alexander. Are you awake? I can't stop thinking about today. Me neither, she typed back. Her phone rang a moment later. I want to name her Emma, Alexander said without preamble, after my grandmother. She raised me when my parents died. She was the kindest person I've ever known. Emma is a beautiful name, Sarah said softly. They talked for over an hour that night. Alexander told her about his grandmother Emma, about how she used to make him breakfast every morning before school even though she'd worked the night shift. About how she'd sat with him through nightmares after his parents died. About how she'd somehow managed to save enough to help with his college tuition despite having almost nothing. She died 2 years ago, Alexander said quietly. I was with her at the end. She told me she was proud of me, but she wished I wasn't so alone. She wanted me to have a family. I think she'd be happy about this. Sarah felt tears on her cheeks. I wish I could have met her. I wish you could have too. She would have liked you. After that conversation, something changed between them. They started talking more, not just about the pregnancy, but about everything. Alexander told her about difficult business decisions he was facing, and Sarah found herself offering perspectives he hadn't considered. She had a way of cutting through complicated situations to the heart of matters. Sarah talked about frustrating days at the hospital, about patients who broke her heart, about the satisfaction of helping someone heal. Alexander listened without judgment, asked thoughtful questions, and seemed to genuinely care about her experiences. At 23 weeks, Sarah went to a work baby shower for another nurse who was pregnant. Everyone cooed over the expectant mother, gave her gifts, talked excitedly about her upcoming arrival. Sarah sat in the corner feeling strangely disconnected. She was pregnant too, obviously so now, but this wasn't her celebration. This baby wasn't hers to keep. One of the older nurses, Linda, sat down beside her. "How are you doing, honey?" "Fine," Sarah said automatically. Linda gave her a knowing look. "I heard from Maya what you're doing. That's a hard thing, being a surrogate." "It's fine. I knew what I was signing up for. Knowing and experiencing are two different things. Don't be surprised if this gets harder as you get further along. That's a baby in there, and your body doesn't understand contracts." Sarah nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. At 25 weeks, Sarah felt the baby kick hard enough to see from the outside. She was at home watching television when it happened, a visible ripple across her belly. The movement was so distinct, so unmistakably a tiny foot or hand pushing against her skin. Without thinking, she grabbed her phone and took a video, watching in amazement as her belly moved. She sent the video to Alexander before she could second-guess herself. He called immediately. "She's moving. Can I come over?" "It's 10 o'clock at night," Sarah said. "Please, I want to feel it." He arrived 20 minutes later, still wearing his suit from work, but with his tie loosened and the top button of his shirt undone. Sarah opened the door, and he stood there looking uncertain. This confident billionaire suddenly awkward and hopeful. "Come in," she said. They sat on her worn couch, so different from the expensive furniture in his penthouse. Sarah took his hand, large and warm, and placed it on her belly. They waited in silence for a moment, and then Emma kicked against his palm. Alexander gasped. "That's incredible," he whispered. "She's really in there. That's my daughter." "She's really in there," Sarah confirmed. Alexander didn't move his hand. They sat like that for almost an hour, feeling Emma move and kick, not talking much, just being present for these small miracles. Sometimes Emma would be still for long stretches, and they'd wait patiently. Then she'd suddenly kick or roll, and Alexander would laugh with pure delight. When he finally left, Sarah felt strangely bereft. Her apartment seemed too quiet, too empty after his presence. The second and third trimesters brought new
challenges. Sarah's back ached constantly. Her feet swelled. She developed pregnancy-induced carpal tunnel syndrome that made her hands numb and clumsy. She had heartburn so bad she slept sitting up. But through it all, Emma kept growing, kept moving, a constant reminder of the life Sarah was nurturing. At 28 weeks, Sarah had to stop working at the hospital. Being on her feet all day had become too difficult, and she'd nearly fainted during a shift. Her supervisor, while sympathetic, couldn't risk having a pregnant nurse collapse on duty. Sarah was devastated. She loved her job, loved helping people, and now that was gone too. Alexander immediately increased her stipend to cover the lost income, but Sarah felt guilty accepting it. "I'm already taking so much from you," she protested when he told her. They were at a prenatal appointment, sitting in the waiting room surrounded by other pregnant women and their partners. Alexander looked at her seriously. "You're growing my daughter. That's not nothing. That's everything. You've given up your job. Your body has changed completely. You're uncomfortable all the time. The least I can do is make sure you're financially secure. It just feels like so much money." "Sarah, I'm a billionaire. The money means nothing to me. You and Emma mean everything." The intensity in his voice surprised her. She studied his face, seeing something there she hadn't noticed before. When had he started looking at her like that, like she mattered beyond her role as surrogate? At 30 weeks, Sarah's father's health took a sudden turn for the worse. She got the call from his hospice nurse of a Wednesday afternoon. Her father had developed pneumonia and wasn't responding to antibiotics. His breathing was labored. She needed to come right away if she wanted to say goodbye. Sarah called Alexander with shaking hands. She was crying so hard she could barely speak. He didn't ask questions or tell her to calm down. He just said, "I'll be there in 10 minutes," and hung up. He arrived in 8 minutes, probably breaking every traffic law in Manhattan. He took one look at her tear-stained face and pulled her into his arms. Then he drove her to the hospice center himself, his hand steady on the wheel while Sarah cried in the passenger seat. He didn't offer platitudes or false hope. He just got her there as quickly as possible. "I'll wait," he said when they arrived. "You don't have to." "I know, but I'm not leaving you here alone." Sarah's father was unconscious when she reached his room, his breathing harsh and rattling. She sat beside his bed, holding his hand, talking to him even though she didn't know if he could hear. She told him about the pregnancy, about how much Emma kicked now. She told him about Alexander, about how he wasn't just the father of the baby, but had become someone important to her.
She told him his medical bills were all paid off, that he didn't have to worry. "I love you, Dad," she whispered. "You were the best father anyone could ask for. You taught me to be strong and kind and to help people. I'm going to miss you every single day for the rest of my life, but it's okay to let go now. It's okay to rest." He died an hour later, quietly, with Sarah holding his hand. The nurse came in and confirmed what Sarah already knew. She sat there for a long time, unable to let go, unable to accept that he was really gone. Finally, she walked back to the waiting room in a daze. Alexander stood immediately when he saw her face. He didn't ask questions. He just pulled her into his arms and let her sob against his expensive suit jacket, while other families in the waiting room pretended not to watch. He drove her back to her apartment and came inside when she couldn't seem to make her legs work properly. He made her tea, which she didn't drink. He sat beside her while she stared at nothing. When she finally fell asleep on the couch from sheer exhaustion, he covered her with a blanket and stayed in the chair across from her, working quietly on his laptop so she wouldn't be alone when she woke up. Over the next few weeks, Alexander handled everything. He arranged her father's funeral, paid for a burial plot next to Sarah's mother who had died years earlier, organized the reception. He went to the hospice center and collected her father's belongings. He dealt with lawyers and paperwork and all the terrible administrative tasks that follow death. Sarah moved through it all feeling numb and disconnected, except for Emma moving inside her, a constant reminder that life continued even when it felt like it shouldn't. The funeral was small but beautiful. Some of her father's old friends came, nurses from the hospice, a few of Sarah's co-workers. Alexander stayed by her side the entire time, a steady presence. "You didn't have to do all that," Sarah said afterward as they sat in her apartment. The reception was over, the guests had left, and it was just the two of them and the overwhelming silence of grief. "I wanted to," Alexander said simply. "You're carrying my child. That makes you important to me. And your father was important to you, so he was important to me too." Something in his phrasing caught her attention. "Important to you because of Emma?" she asked quietly. Alexander was quiet for a long moment. "At first, yes, but not anymore." "What does that mean?" "It means I care about you, Sarah, not as the surrogate carrying my baby, but as a person, as someone I've gotten to know and respect and genuinely like. These past months, talking to you, spending time with you, it's been the best part of my day, every day." Sarah felt tears threatening again, but these were different from the grief tears she'd been crying for weeks. "Alexander, this is complicated. I'm pregnant with your baby. We have a contract. In a few months, I'm going to hand her over and walk away. That was the agreement." "Is that what you want?" he asked quietly. The question hung between them, heavy with implications. Sarah realized she didn't know the answer anymore. At the beginning, yes, absolutely. She'd been clear that she wanted no contact after the birth. Clean break, no complications. But now, the thought of never seeing Alexander again, never knowing how Emma was doing, never having these conversations that had become so important to her, it felt unbearable. "I don't know what I want anymore," she admitted. Alexander reached over and took her hand. "Then let's not decide right now. Let's just take this one day at a time and see what happens. No pressure, no expectations. Just us." "Just us," Sarah repeated. At 34 weeks, Sarah's blood pressure started creeping up at her regular checkup. The obstetrician frowned at the numbers and took them again. Still elevated. She ordered a urine test and additional blood work. "I'm concerned about preeclampsia," the doctor said. "I want to monitor you closely. No more working, not even light activity. Strict bed rest from now on." "For how long?" Sarah asked. "Until delivery. I know it's difficult, but preeclampsia can be dangerous for both you and the baby. We need to take this seriously." Alexander was in the waiting room as usual. When Sarah came out and explained the situation, his face went pale. "What can we do? What do you need?" The doctor said bed rest. Literally, just lying down as much as possible. Then that's what you'll do. I'll hire a nurse to stay with you during the day, and I'll stay nights. Alexander, you can't just move into my apartment. Watch me. Sarah wanted to argue, but she was too tired and too scared, so she let him take control. Within 24 hours, he'd hired a private nurse named Carol who was cheerful and competent. And he showed up that evening with a suitcase and set himself up in her tiny guest room without asking permission. They settled into an odd domestic routine. Carol came during the day, taking Sarah's blood pressure every few hours, making sure she ate properly, helping her with basic tasks. Alexander worked from Sarah's apartment, taking calls in the kitchen while Sarah rested on the couch. He cooked meals, though he admitted he'd never really cooked before and mostly followed video tutorials with mixed results. The first night, he made pasta that was somehow both undercooked and burnt. Sarah ate it anyway because he'd tried so hard. By the end of the week, he'd actually gotten decent at a few basic dishes. "You're a quick learner," Sarah said as she ate the stir-fry he'd made. "I'm motivated," Alexander said. They watched movies in the evening, argued about books they were reading, and talked about everything and nothing. Sarah learned that Alexander had wanted to be an architect, but went into business instead because it was more practical. That he played piano but hadn't touched one in years. That he donated anonymously to children's hospitals and education charities. That despite all his wealth and success, he was profoundly lonely. And Alexander learned that Sarah had always wanted to travel, but had never left the country. That she read romance novels and cried at the endings. That she missed her mother, who had died when Sarah was 15. That she'd become a nurse because she wanted to help people, the way nurses had helped her family when her mother was sick. One night, as they sat together watching some mindless comedy, Emma kicked hard enough to make Sarah wince. Alexander immediately noticed. "Is she okay? Are you okay?" "She's just active tonight. Here, feel." She guided his hand to where the baby was moving. Alexander's palm pressed against her belly, warm and steady. Emma kicked directly into his hand, and he laughed with delight. But then their eyes met, and suddenly the air between them felt charged with something that had been building for weeks. "Sarah," Alexander said softly. "Don't," she whispered. "Please don't say it." "Why not?" "Because I'm pregnant with your baby. Because I signed a contract. Because this is messy and complicated, and in a few weeks I'm supposed to walk away." "What if I don't want you to walk away?" he said. "What if I want you to stay? Not as the surrogate, but as yourself, as Sarah, as someone I'm falling in love with." "You don't mean that. It's just proximity and hormones and the situation. Once Emma is born and things are normal again, you'll realize this was just some weird pregnancy fantasy." Alexander moved closer, his hand still on her belly. "I've been alone by choice for 20 years. I've dated, but I never let anyone get close. I never wanted to. But you changed that. These months with you have made me realize what I've been missing. It's not just about having Emma anymore. It's about having you too. Coming home to you, talking to you, just being with you. That's what makes me happy." Sarah felt her heart hammering. "I'm scared. What if this feeling goes away after she's born? What if you realize you only felt this way because of the circumstances? What if I'm just some temporary fixation? Then we'll deal with it. But Sarah, I need you to know that I'm serious. I'm falling in love with you. I probably have been for weeks now, maybe months. And I think you might feel the same way about me, even if you're too scared to admit it." Before Sarah could respond, she felt a sudden sharp pain in her abdomen. She gasped, doubling over. "What's wrong?" Alexander asked urgently. "I don't know. That hurt." The pain came again, stronger this time, radiating across her belly and into her back. Alexander was already on his phone, calling the obstetrician. Within minutes, they were in his car heading to the hospital. Sarah tried to breathe through the contractions, because that's what they were, she realized. She was in labor at 34 weeks. At the hospital, everything happened quickly. Sarah was admitted to labor and delivery, where nurses hooked her up to monitors and an IV. The obstetrician on call examined her and delivered the news they'd been hoping to avoid. "You're 3 centimeters dilated and having regular contractions. We're going to try to stop the labor with medication, but I need to be honest with you. At 34 weeks, if we can't stop it, we may need to let it progress. The baby's lungs should be developed enough, but we'll have the NICU team on standby just in case." Sarah felt panic rising in her chest. She's too early. She's not ready. The doctor's expression was kind but firm. "Babies born at 34 weeks do very well, Sarah. You know this. You're a nurse. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. We're going to do everything we can to stop this labor." They started her on magnesium sulfate, which made Sarah feel hot and disoriented. Alexander sat beside her bed, holding her hand, his face pale. She could see the fear in his eyes, the same fear she was feeling. Emma wasn't supposed to come yet. They had 6 more weeks. 6 more weeks to prepare, to be ready. But babies, as Sarah well knew from her years of nursing, had their own schedules. The medication didn't work. Over the next several hours, Sarah's contractions continued, getting stronger and more frequent. The obstetrician checked her again and shook her head. "You're at 6 centimeters now. This baby is coming today. I'm sorry, but we need to prepare for delivery." Sarah looked at Alexander, scared. He squeezed her hand. "It's going to be okay," he said, though his voice was tight with worry. "Emma's strong. She's a fighter." "How do you know that?" "Because she's yours." The words hung in the air between them. Not his, which would have been accurate. Yours. As if Sarah was already Emma's mother in every way that mattered. Labor progressed quickly after that. Sarah had declined an epidural, wanting to stay as alert as possible in case there were complications. The pain was intense, worse than anything she'd imagined. But Alexander never left her side. He held her hand through every contraction, wiped sweat from her forehead, told her she was doing great, even when she screamed at him that he had no idea what she was talking about. At one point, during a particularly brutal contraction, Sarah gripped his hand so hard she thought she might break his fingers. "I can't do this," she gasped. "I can't. It's too much." "Yes, you can," Alexander said firmly. "You're the strongest person I know. You've been through so much, and you've never given up. Don't give up now. Emma needs you. I need you." The obstetrician came in to check her progress again. "You're fully dilated. It's time to push." Sarah felt a surge of fear so intense it almost paralyzed her. This was it. In a few minutes, Emma would be born. This baby she'd been carrying for 8 months, this child she'd felt kick and move and hiccup, would be out in the world. And 6 weeks early, small and vulnerable. "I'm scared," she whispered to Alexander. "I know, me too. But we're going to do this together." "She's not mine to keep," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. "You
Know that, right? After this, she's yours. I hand her over and I walk away. That was the deal." Alexander's jaw clenched. "We'll figure it out. Right now, just focus on bringing her into the world safely." The actual birth was a blur of pain and effort and fear. Sarah pushed when they told her to push, breathed when they told her to breathe, and held Alexander's hand so hard she was definitely leaving bruises. The obstetrician gave her constant updates on the baby's position, her progress, how close they were. And then, suddenly, there was a cry. Small and indignant, but unmistakably alive. The most beautiful sound Sarah had ever heard. "It's a girl," the doctor announced, unnecessarily, holding up the tiny, red-faced baby, covered in vernix and blood. Sarah tried to see her, but the NICU team was already there, whisking Emma away to check her lungs and make sure everything was functioning properly. She caught only a glimpse of a small body, impossibly tiny, before Emma was gone. "Is she okay?" Sarah asked frantically. "Is she breathing?" "She's crying, which is a good sign," the doctor said. "Let the team do their assessment. You did great, Sarah. You did so well." Alexander was staring after the NICU team, clearly torn between staying with Sarah and following his daughter. Sarah made the decision for him. "Go," she told him. "Go be with her. Make sure she's okay." He hesitated only a moment, then kissed Sarah's forehead quickly. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for my daughter." Then he was gone, following the medical team, leaving Sarah alone with the obstetrician and nurses who were now tending to her, delivering the placenta, checking for tears, doing all the routine post-delivery care. Sarah barely registered any of it. Her body felt empty, hollowed out. The weight she'd been carrying for months was suddenly gone. Emma was born at 4 pounds 6 ounces, small but not dangerously so. Her lungs were developed enough that she could breathe on her own, though they wanted to monitor her in the NICU for a few days to be safe. Sarah heard all this from the nurse who came to update her, but she couldn't seem to process the information properly. She kept thinking she should feel relieved, happy even. Emma was healthy. The birth had gone well. Everything had worked out. So why did she feel like her heart was being ripped out of her chest? Sarah was moved to a recovery room a few hours later. She'd been given pain medication and was feeling disconnected, floating. A nurse came in to check her vitals and asked if she wanted to see the baby. "I don't think that's a good idea," Sarah said quietly. "Are you sure? The father said you could visit whenever you wanted." "I'm sure." But after the nurse left, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about it. Emma was down the hall in the NICU, and Sarah hadn't even seen her properly, hadn't held her, hadn't looked at her face. She just pushed her out and handed her over like she was completing a transaction, which technically she was. That was the agreement. That was what she'd signed up for. But it didn't feel like a transaction anymore. It felt like abandonment. Sarah lasted 2 hours before she couldn't take it anymore. She got out of bed carefully, her body sore and aching, and made her way down the hall to the NICU. The nurse at the desk recognized her. "You must be Sarah. Mr. Hartman has been asking about you. He's with Emma now. Go on in." Sarah pushed through the doors into the NICU, a room she'd been in countless times as a nurse, but never as a patient or parent. The space was quiet, except for the beeping of monitors and the soft sounds of babies. Alexander was standing in front of one of the incubators, just staring at the baby, inside with an expression of complete wonder. Sarah approached slowly. Through the clear plastic of the incubator, she could see Emma properly for the first time. She was tiny, so much smaller than Sarah had imagined. She had a shock of dark hair and was wearing only a diaper, with sensors attached to her chest to monitor her heart rate and breathing. Her eyes were closed, her little fists curled up near her face. She was perfect. "Hi," Alexander said softly, noticing Sarah. "How are you feeling?" "Sore, tired, empty." "She's beautiful," Alexander said, gesturing to Emma. "She looks like you." "She looks like you," Sarah countered. "She has your chin." They stood together in silence, watching Emma sleep. After a moment, the NICU nurse came over. "Would you like to hold her? She's doing great. Her vitals are all stable." Sarah started to say no, that it wasn't her place, but Alexander spoke first. "Please," he said, "you should hold her. You carried her all this time." The nurse carefully lifted Emma from the incubator, managing all the wires and sensors with practiced ease, and placed her in Sarah's arms. Emma was warm and solid, despite being so small. Her weight somehow both significant and insubstantial. Sarah looked down at the tiny face, the button nose, the rosebud mouth, and felt something crack open inside her chest. "Hi, Emma," she whispered. "Hi, sweetheart. I'm here. I've been here all along." Emma's eyes fluttered open at the sound of Sarah's voice. They were dark blue, unfocused, but somehow seeming to look right at Sarah. One tiny hand escaped from her swaddle, and Sarah offered her pinky, which Emma immediately grasped with surprising strength. "She knows your voice," Alexander said quietly. "She's been hearing it for months." Tears were streaming down Sarah's face. "I love her," she said, the words barely audible. "I love her so much, and it terrifies me." Alexander moved closer, putting his arm around Sarah's shoulders while she held his daughter. "Love is terrifying," he agreed, "but it's also the only thing that matters. Sarah, I need to ask you something." "What?" "The contract we signed, the agreement. I want to tear it up." Sarah's heart stuttered. "What are you talking about? I don't want you to walk away. I don't want Emma to grow up without you. You're her mother, Sarah. You carried her, you kept her safe, you brought her into this world.
Biology doesn't define motherhood. Love does. And you love her. I can see it in your face." "This isn't what we agreed to," Sarah whispered. "You wanted a surrogate, someone to carry your baby and hand her over, clean and simple." "I was wrong. Nothing about this is simple, and I don't want it to be clean. I want messy and complicated and real. I want you, Sarah. I want us to raise Emma together. I want us to be a family. What if it doesn't work? What if we try this and it falls apart? Then we'll deal with it like adults, for Emma's sake. But Sarah, what if it does work? What if we could actually be happy? Don't we owe it to ourselves, to Emma, to try?" Sarah looked down at the baby in her arms, then up at Alexander's face. She saw hope there, and fear, and love. So much love. "Yes," she said finally. "Yes, let's try." Alexander's smile was brilliant, transforming his usually serious face into something warm and joyful. He leaned down and kissed Sarah, carefully so as not to disturb Emma between them. It was a promise and a beginning. Emma had to stay in the NICU for 12 days. During that time, Sarah and Alexander practically lived at the hospital. They took turns holding Emma, feeding her tiny bottles of formula, changing her impossibly small diapers, and talking to her constantly. The NICU nurses teased them about being helicopter parents, but they didn't care. Sarah's hospital room became their base of operations. Alexander had his assistant bring changes of clothes and work materials. Sarah's discharge papers came through, but she refused to leave. The hospital, understanding the situation, allowed her to stay in an empty room so she could be close to Emma. Late one night, as they sat together in Sarah's room after Emma's midnight feeding, Alexander pulled out some papers from his briefcase. "I had my lawyers draw these up," he said. "It terminates our original surrogacy contract and establishes us as Emma's parents with equal legal rights, if you want to sign them." Sarah took the papers and read through them carefully. They were straightforward, no complex legal language, just a simple agreement that Sarah Chen and Alexander Hartman were Emma's parents, with shared custody and decision-making rights. "What about the money?" Sarah asked. "The contract payment?" "That's yours regardless. Consider it payment for the pregnancy, for everything you went through. It has nothing to do with Emma or us. You earned that money, Sarah." She signed the papers with a shaking hand, making it official. She was Emma's mother now, legally and in every other way. They brought Emma home on a Tuesday afternoon. Alexander had transformed one of the bedrooms in his penthouse into a nursery, complete with a crib, changing table, and more stuffed animals than any baby could possibly need. But he'd also set up a second nursery in Sarah's apartment, identical to the first, so Emma would have everything she needed in both places. "You went overboard," Sarah said, looking around at the lavishly decorated room in the penthouse. "I got excited," Alexander admitted sheepishly. "The baby store was having a sale, and I may have bought one of everything." Emma, of course, didn't care about the expensive furnishings or designer baby clothes. She slept, ate, cried, and required constant attention. Those first few weeks home were exhausting in ways Sarah hadn't anticipated, despite her nursing experience. Taking care of patients' babies was completely different from being responsible for one 24/7. She and Alexander took shifts through the night, stumbling past each other like zombies as they dealt with feedings and diaper changes every 2 to 3 hours. They were too tired to be romantic, too overwhelmed to think about their relationship beyond the practical necessities of caring for an infant. Alexander learned to change diapers with the efficiency of a NASCAR pit crew. Sarah discovered she could function on surprisingly little sleep as long as she had coffee. One particularly difficult night, when Emma wouldn't stop crying no matter what they tried, Sarah finally broke down. "I don't know what I'm doing," she sobbed, holding a screaming Emma. "I'm supposed to be a nurse. I should know how to help her." Alexander took Emma gently from her arms. "You're exhausted. Go lie down for a few hours. I've got this. You need sleep too. I'll sleep later. Right now, you need rest more." Sarah was too tired to argue. She collapsed on the bed and was asleep within seconds. When she woke 3 hours later, the apartment was quiet. She found Alexander in the nursery, sitting in the rocking chair with Emma asleep on his chest.
He was sleeping too, his head tilted back, one large hand cradling Emma's tiny body protectively. Sarah stood in the doorway watching them, her heart so full it hurt. This was her family, this exhausted, stressed, completely overwhelmed, absolutely perfect family. Gradually, they found their rhythm. Emma started sleeping for longer stretches at night, blessed 4-hour periods that felt like luxury. They learned her different cries and what each one meant. Alexander proved surprisingly good at soothing her when she was fussy, walking endless circles around the apartment while humming off-key. Sarah discovered she could nurse Emma while answering work emails on her phone, maximizing her limited awake time. Sarah had decided not to go back to the hospital immediately. She wanted to be with Emma full-time for the first year, and Alexander supported that decision completely. They fell into a routine where Alexander would work from home several days a week, taking conference calls while wearing Emma in a baby carrier against his chest. His business partners were initially skeptical, but quickly adapted when they realized he was just as effective with a baby strapped to him. 3 months after Emma's birth, they finally had an evening where she went down easily and stayed asleep. Sarah and Alexander looked at each other in disbelief from their positions on the couch, afraid to move or speak in case they broke the spell. "What do we do now?" Sarah whispered. "I have no idea," Alexander admitted. "I've forgotten what free time feels like." They ended up just sitting together, Sarah curled against Alexander's side, both of them too exhausted to even turn on the television. It was quiet and peaceful and perfect. Alexander's fingers traced lazy patterns on Sarah's arm. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what?" "For saying yes, for giving us a chance, for being Emma's mother, for everything. A year ago, I was alone in my empty penthouse thinking success meant money and power. Now I come home to you and Emma, and I realize I didn't know what success was. This is success, this moment right here." Sarah tilted her head up to look at him. "You know this isn't how I imagined my life going. A year ago, I was drowning in debt and exhausted and alone. I never thought I'd be here, with you, with Emma, actually happy." "I never thought I'd be here either," Alexander said. "I thought I'd build my empire and be satisfied with professional achievement. But this, coming home to you and Emma, having a family, having something that matters more than money or business deals or any of that, this is what I was missing. This is what makes life worth living." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, just being together. Eventually, Sarah spoke again, her voice soft. "I was so scared at the beginning. When you told me you had feelings for me, I thought it was just the situation, just proximity and pregnancy hormones creating something artificial. But it wasn't, was it?" "No," Alexander said. "It was. Is. I love you, Sarah. Not because you carried my baby or because we're co-parenting. I love you because of who you are. Your strength and your kindness and your compassion. The way you care about people, the way you make me laugh, the way you see through all my carefully constructed walls to who I really am underneath." "I love you too," Sarah said. "I think I have for a while, even when I was too scared to admit it. You're not who I thought you were. When we first met, I saw this cold billionaire who was buying his way to fatherhood. But you're so much more than that. You're kind and thoughtful, and you try so hard at everything, even when it's difficult." The sound of Emma crying from the nursery interrupted them. They both sighed, but it was a contented sigh rather than a frustrated one. Alexander started to get up, but Sarah stopped him. "My turn," she said. "You stay here." She went to the nursery and found Emma awake and fussy, her little face scrunched up. Sarah lifted her from the crib, and Emma immediately calmed at the familiar touch and scent. "Hi, baby girl," Sarah whispered, settling into the rocking chair. "Were you lonely? Did you wake up and wonder where
Everyone went? She rocked Emma gently, humming softly, and watched as the baby's eyes slowly drifted closed again. Sarah marveled at how much had changed. This little person, who had started as a business arrangement, was now the center of her entire world. She couldn't imagine life without Emma, couldn't imagine walking away like she'd originally planned. When she came back to the living room carrying a now sleeping Emma, Alexander held out his arms. They sat together with Emma between them, and it felt complete. This was family. Not bound by biology or legal contracts, but by choice and love and commitment. As the months passed, Emma grew from a tiny preemie into a chunky, happy baby. She smiled at 6 weeks, laughed at 3 months, and started babbling constantly at 4 months. She adored both her parents equally, reaching for whoever was closest, snuggling into familiar arms without preference. Sarah went back to work part-time when Emma was 9 months old, taking a position at a small clinic near the penthouse. It was easier than hospital work, more predictable hours, and it allowed her to still spend most of her time with Emma. Alexander hired a nanny named Rosa who was wonderful, but both parents found excuses to work from home as much as possible. One evening, when Emma was 11 months old and had just taken her first wobbly steps, Alexander looked at Sarah seriously. "Move in with me permanently," he said. "Not just staying over most nights, but actually living here. Make this your home." "What about my apartment?" "Sublet it, sell it, keep it as storage, I don't care. I want you here all the time. I want to wake up next to you every morning. I want us to be a real family in every sense." "We are a real family," Sarah said. "I know, but I want to make it official in every way possible. Move in with me. And then, when you're ready, marry me." Sarah's breath caught. "Is that a proposal?" "It's a statement of intent. The actual proposal will be much better, I promise, with a ring and probably some elaborate romantic gesture, because apparently that's what people do. But yes, Sarah, I'm going to ask you to marry me. Probably soon. And I really hope you'll say yes." Sarah smiled, tears gathering in her eyes. "I'll say yes. Whenever you ask, the answer will be yes." They got married 6 months later, on Emma's 2nd birthday. It was a small ceremony with just close friends and family. Emma was the flower girl, though she mostly just scattered petals randomly and tried to eat them, which made everyone laugh. Maya was Sarah's maid of honor and cried through the entire ceremony. During the vows, when the officiant asked if they took each other to be husband and wife, Emma shouted yes so loudly that the whole gathering burst into laughter. Alexander grinned and said, "You heard her. Yes, definitely yes." Sarah repeated her vows through happy tears, promising to love Alexander and Emma for all her days, through good times and bad, in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, though the poorer part seemed unlikely given Alexander's net worth, until death parted them. At the reception, as they danced together with Emma between them, Sarah felt overwhelming gratitude. Not for the money or the security, though those were certainly nice, but for this. For the family she'd accidentally found when she was at her lowest point. For the love that had grown from the most unlikely beginning. Alexander leaned down to whisper in her ear, "Thank you for taking a chance on me, on us." "Thank you for seeing me," Sarah whispered back, "for wanting me to stay, for loving me." "Always," Alexander promised. Emma squealed and clapped her hands, delighted by the music and the lights and being the center of attention. Sarah looked at her daughter, this miracle child who had changed everything, and felt her heart overflow with love. Life had taken such an unexpected turn. 2 years ago, Sarah had been a broke nurse staring at collection notices, desperate and alone. She'd agreed to carry a stranger's baby purely for money, with every intention of walking away after delivery and never looking back. It was supposed to be a transaction, clean and simple. But nothing about love was ever simple. And somewhere along the way, between prenatal appointments and late-night conversations and feeling Emma kick for the first time, a transaction had become a relationship. A business arrangement had become a family. A desperate choice had become the best decision Sarah ever made. As she danced with her husband and daughter at their wedding reception, Sarah thought about that woman in the hospital break room. The one who couldn't see any way forward, who felt like she was drowning. She wished she could go back and tell her that everything would be okay, better than okay. That sometimes when you're at your lowest point, when you make choices out of desperation rather than desire, those choices can lead you exactly where you need to be. Emma started
to fuss, tired from all the excitement. Sarah lifted her up, and Emma immediately tucked her head against Sarah's shoulder with a contented sigh. Alexander wrapped his arms around both of them, and they stood there in the middle of the dance floor, their own little island of family in the midst of celebration. This was home, Sarah realized. Not the penthouse with its expensive furniture and stunning views. Not any physical place. Home was these two people. This little family they'd built from nothing but hope and love and determination. Home was Alexander's steady presence and Emma's sweet weight in her arms. Home was choosing each other, every single day, even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. "I love you," Sarah told Alexander. "I love you too," he said. "Both of you. My whole world." Emma lifted her head and looked at both her parents with those serious, dark blue eyes she'd inherited from her father. "Mama," she said clearly. "Dada. Love." "Yes, baby," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face again. "Love. So much love." And that, Sarah thought, as she held her daughter close and leaned into her husband's embrace, was what mattered. Not the money that had brought them together, or the contract that should have kept them apart. Just love. Pure, unexpected, transformative love. The kind of love that changed everything.